Welcome back, everyone, as we dive right into the second half of Harald Hardrada from History Dose. If you didn't see the first half of my look at this fantastic video, link is in the description so you can get caught up and then you can come back to this one. Either way, definitely check out History Dose. I think they do a great job with their videos, and this one is no exception. Let's go ahead and dive into part 2. Time to take his kingdom back.
Dragon ships cast onto the shore, and Northmen swept over the land at the command of Sweyn and Harald. The two men had sworn an oath of allegiance. Together they would seize Denmark for Sweyn and Norway for Harald.
Pretty good gig.
Towns became screaming pyres. They hacked men to death and tore wailing women from lowly huts. And it was said, "Few were they of escape to tell, for sorrow-worn the people fell. The only captives from the fray were lovely maidens led away, and in wild terror to the strand, down to the ships the linked band of fair-haired girls is roughly driven, their soft skins by the irons riven." Tidings of war reached Magnus, and the king's council did not think it wise to oppose Harald. And so messengers passed in secret between Magnus and Harald to negotiate the co-rulership of Norway between them.
Which is what Harald asked for to begin with. It's amazing to me how often this happens, where someone is given an opportunity. I mean, I think of Napoleon given the opportunity to save his what was left of his empire before all the coalition armies invaded France after the debacle at places like Leipzig. It was only when it was too late that he finally was willing to negotiate. There was a chance here for this to not get to this point.
Sweyn suspected betrayal. He attempted to assassinate Harald in his sleep, but Harald escaped. And at long last he was crowned King Harald III of Norway. As co-ruler, Magnus insisted on being the primary king, granted precedence in courtly matters and ritual. Magnus was beloved by his people for his leniency and generosity. And for
This is not a scenario that can last forever, though. How many times has this happened, and the guy who's in second eventually says, I could do it better. I deserve to be in charge, not this guy. This is an untenable situation, and I think both sides have to know that. But let me just also say, what an incredible, Hollywood script Harald's story is. I mean, from start to finish. It's just fantastic.
For this, Harald resented him as weak and childish. The two insulted each other with impunity, but still a greater danger united them. They moved against Sweyn in Denmark, and there, in the fall of the year 1047, Magnus was said to have been gripped by an illness. With his waning strength, Magnus declared that the sole rule of Norway would pass to Harald, and Denmark given over to Sweyn. King Magnus the Good then died.
It works out for Harald and Sweyn. Now they don't have to worry about fighting over this, but you know it's still going to happen, right?
Harald did not think himself bound by the wishes of dying kings. At once he made preparations to move with haste against Sweyn and claim the throne of Denmark. But the king...
This is where Harald's going to start. I mean, he's going to have some success, but eventually it's going to be a bridge too far, so to speak, when he goes after the throne of England as well. People rarely know when enough is enough.
King's assembly, Einar openly declared that he himself would return to bury Magnus in Norway, and that he would rather serve Magnus dead than any other king alive. The fighting men loyal to the chieftain Einar were so numerous and his influence so great that Harald had little choice but to tolerate such treasonous speech and return to assert his rule over Norway. For the high thrones of Scandinavia had not entirely supplanted the power of the Viking halls. Kings were still obliged to reckon with the old war clans of every region.
And this is true later on in other places as well, but this is one of the dangers. It works both ways, right? You need these powerful noblemen under you with their armies and with their finances in order to be able to wield enough power to rule. But then that also means that those same noblemen with those armies and with those finances hold sway over you.
Sweyn was raised as the king of the Danes, and when Harald went to ravage Denmark in the summer, Sweyn eluded capture. Harald returned to Norway and married a second wife, Thora of the influential Arneson family. While his wives would bear him children to be raised as heirs to Norway, the king's gaze turned ever south.
Beautiful.
In 1050, he returned to terrorize Denmark. His Vikings tore over farmland, ruined villages, and burned churches. They tortured people to death, violated women, and burned the trading post of Hedeby. When Sweyn at last met Harald with a massive army, Harald fled.
I'm just finding myself thinking about how lucky we are, like as me as a white middle-class male American living in Northeast Ohio. In all of human history, how few people have had it as comfortable as people like me do right now. I mean, this was the norm for them, that at any given day you could wake up and that could be the day that a Viking raid could show up on your shores. And that could be the end of your life, or that could mean captivity for the rest of your life, or that could mean your children are hauled off and you never see them again. Just how blessed we are to be in the here and now. And I recognize that there are a lot of people in the world today who still have fears like that and still have to worry about that. There's places in Africa and places in Asia where those kinds of fears still exist.
In Norway, Harald moved to punish and assassinate those who questioned his rule. Yet Einar stood at the head of a mighty faction of chieftains who freely decried the king's butchery. At length, Harald requested a meeting with Einar to resolve the matter. Einar stepped alone into the king's chamber and remarked how dark the room was. A few of Harald's men then emerged from the shadows and killed him.
Wow. Again, this art is fantastic. They do such a great job. Good job, guys. I mean, phenomenal history dose.
Einar's son rushed in to the aid of his father, and they killed him too. The people came to despise King Harald, and there was wide talk of rebellion among the farmers. The king tasked his ally, Finn Arneson, to entreat them to peace. Finn requested the king offer something in exchange for so dangerous a quest: the safe return of his brother, Kulf. Kulf Arneson was the greatest traitor to Harald's house. He was said to have personally killed Olaf. When Magnus learned of this crime years ago, Kulf fled into exile to the Norwegian domains along the northern edge of Scotland. Harald now welcomed Kulf back to Norway and restored him to his old estates. Then, in the summer, King Harald went on campaign in Denmark and demanded that Kulf make the first assault against the Danish position. Only after Kulf was overrun and killed with his men did Harald land with reinforcements.
Convenient.
Finn and all the people saw plainly the treachery of their vengeful king. Harald wrote that he took pride in having given the death stroke to 2 more of his enemies. The king burned and pillaged regions whose fealty wavered, and there were rumors that he stole offerings set by the faithful at the tomb of Saint Olaf. Though he raised great churches and the kingdom outwardly prospered, the people in coming centuries would know him as Hardrada, the hard ruler. For years he shed the blood of so many foes, but still the hated Sweyn of Denmark remained.
This guy just had to have enemies. He always had to have somebody that he was after. And once he takes care of Sweyn, it's just going to be somebody else. Another Harald. The enemy king.
Harald commanded 150 longships south, plundering shores which in those days belonged to the Danes. Then, near the mouth of the river Nissa, the men were taken by the sight of a fleet twice their size.
Wow.
Sweyn had come to answer the king's challenge to war. In this land, the late summer sun lingers long in the sky, and the embers of twilight burn on the horizon even in the darkest hour. In the shadowy haze, Harald stirred his men to battle. Each fleet was lashed together with ropes and chains to hold the lines, and they crashed forward. Arrows and spears were flung into shields, chests, and heads. Untethered Norwegian ships then outflanked the Danes, and a slaughter began on the decks.
Was not expecting this to end up in a major naval battle, but sometimes that happens. I mean, even people who are known for kind of being more land fighters. I mean, what was the deciding battle between Mark Antony and Octavian, who became Caesar Augustus? It was the naval battle of Actium.
The Danes threw themselves overboard, and Harald took 70 of their ships. In the sea of gashed bodies, his warriors captured alive Finn Arneson, who had betrayed Harald to serve Sweyn. Harald decided to spare him. At any rate, King Sweyn had escaped the battle and regrouped. The two kingdoms had been drained by war, and within 2 years, Harald brokered unconditional peace with Sweyn. Harald would remain in Norway, content to maim and kill the people of defiant regions.
Makes me wonder, had he been successful and taken Denmark sooner, would he have wanted then to turn his attention on England the way that he did in 1066, or would he have done that anyway?
In this manner, he gained peace in his country by blood and fear. The king would spend quiet hours composing poetry, pondering his own legacy. He may have heard tales of the distant Norsemen who reached North America some decades ago. He himself had journeyed far south as a mercenary, and as king he explored north into glacial seas beyond the map's edge.
I mean, how many cultures at this time in history spread out and had such reach as all the way down to Constantinople and all the way west to Greenland and even to North America, to what is today Canada.
Realms surely host to wild beasts and ancient monsters. Of his voyages, it was written, the king finally had to turn back when the extreme limit of the world disappeared in fog before his eyes. He barely escaped the gaping ravine of the abyss. Harald had lived 50 winters, and the days of glorious and terrible war might have seemed but memories to an aging king. Yet one day a traveler came to his court. He was Tostig Godwinson, or an envoy on his behalf. Tostig had until recently ruled in the Kingdom of England as the Earl of Northumbria, but he had been a harsh ruler, and when the people rebelled against him, his rival brother Harald Godwinson succeeded in having him banished.
So remember, at this point, England is united. It hasn't been united for that long. It's only been several generations. You once had Northumbria and East Anglia. East Anglia is part of, I guess, was it probably part of Mercia? I mean, you had a kingdom in Kent, you had Wessex, and these all have been united, but for a good chunk of that time, the eastern part of what is now England was the Danelaw. It was ruled by what the English called Danes.
And upon the death of the childless King Edward, the English High Council crowned Harald Godwinson the King of England. The jealous brother Tostig sought retribution, imploring Harald of Norway to conquer the country, to redeem Magnus's old claim to the English throne. Harald Hardrada could become the Viking King of England, and Tostig would regain land and power as his vassal. So Harald prepared an army. In dreams, dark omens came to the King of Norway and his followers.
That's cool.
One man saw a great battle in England, and before him a witch riding a wolf. With bloody jaws, her beast devoured the carcasses of Harald's men, and she sang, "The troll woman sees clearly the doom awaiting Harald."
And you have to wonder, of course, how much of this is kind of apocryphal stuff that is written after the fact, right? Where somebody's writing down the story of Harald Godwinson's victory at Stamford Bridge, and is therefore kind of in retrospect saying, well, Harald Hardrada should have known that this was going to end in doom because it was foreseen. always will remain to me one of the great what if periods in history, when we're talking about alternate history and diverging points that could have dramatically changed everything that came after. I mean, we're talking the last 1,000 years have been directly impacted by the events of 1066 in a significant way. And if a couple of things, if the weather had been different, if timing had been just a few weeks in one direction or the other, how different could England have been? It could have ended up ruled by Harald Hardrada. It could have ended up ruled by an Anglo-Saxon king and Harald Godwinson. And it could have, as it did in our timeline, ended up ruled by a Norman.
Grassy cliffs pulled high and quiet over the sea and sloped into little dwellings where people beheld a scowling fleet bearing an army of around 10,000 warriors. Harald and his Vikings buttressed by Tostig and some of his allies. Towns submitted to them readily, and when the village of Skartaborg stood against them, the Vikings tossed burning wood onto their houses and slaughtered the people. The invaders proceeded inland by river, far from the gaze of King Harald Godwinson, who was perched in the south with his army, anticipating an invasion from another claimant to the English crown, William, Duke of Normandy. The Normans themselves were the descendants of Viking raiders who over a century ago gained land along the French coast, mixing with indigenous Franks and adopting much of their customs.
And that's an important thing to point out there, because people like to point out the fact that, oh yeah, they're the Northmen. That's why it's called Normandy, and they're Vikings. But yeah, and while it's true that in the direct male line for William the Bastard, William, Duke of Normandy, that he's descended from Rollo, who's a Viking. Most of his family tree by that point is French, and their culture is very much French. They're much more French than they are Viking at that point. They had been given that land to kind of keep them from continuing to raid France. So William's very much French.
For now, Harald met little resistance as his army neared the great city of York, whose weathered walls and towers were the traces of ancient times.
Yeah, and York itself, its name comes from Jorvik, which is the Viking name for what had been, I think, Ephewich in the Anglo-Saxon, and the Romans called it Boricum.
This country belonged to the shining legions of Rome. The English would not now cower behind its walls. On September 20th, the Earls of Mercia and Northumbria led their armies against the Viking horde near the marshlands. The invaders pummeled them wildly, and the corpses of Englishmen were scattered about the wet grass. Survivors fled. York and the whole of Northumbria resolved to surrender. The nobles would be spared violence, but made to guarantee their loyalty by offering their children to be held as hostages by the Vikings. And so on September 25th, Harald took 2/3 of his army, and leaving their mail armor behind due to the hot weather, they marched to the site chosen for the exchange of hostages, Stamford Bridge. A cloud of dust appeared in the distance. Having trekked 200 miles in 4 or 5 days, here was King Harald Godwinson and a great English army.
And this is remarkable by Harald, because he's got an army that is not like a standing army, right? So he's got a limited amount of time with them in the field before they're going to want to go home. And it's the fall, so it's like harvest time coming up, and so he's sitting on the south coast waiting for William to come across. Well, William's not able to come across because you have to wait for the winds to be favorable and everything, and the conditions just aren't right. And so finally he's got to go north, and then he's going to deal with this battle. And it makes me wonder, had William come across sooner, I have to believe that Harald Godwinson would have won that battle, because he nearly won. He should have won the Battle of Hastings anyway after fighting this battle. Had it gone the other way, it makes me wonder what would have happened.
Harald of Norway sent riders to summon the remaining third of his army over an hour's ride away. The English pushed onto the bridge. English chronicles would later tell that when his countrymen had fallen, one Viking held the bridge alone for some time.
This is such a, like one of those, that's why I say this is such a Hollywood movie, Harald Hardrada's whole story. And this last stand by this guy on the bridge before he finally, I think somebody gets him from underneath, is just one of those things that you can't make up.
dozens of English before he was killed. Farther back, Harald Hardrada rode before his army, shouting that though they lacked armor, their hearts were fearless. The men rallied shield to shield in a ring, spears planted forward, archers ready. The English cavalry charged and the Vikings repulsed them. The English infantry then crashed upon the edges, but the line held strong. At length the English retreated, and when the Viking front roared in pursuit, the English turned around to rush the gaps in their ranks. In this bloodied swelter, hewn limbs and heads piled underfoot, and dying screams rang out. Harald of Norway took up his rageful sword and slashed at his foes. It was said, neither helmet nor armor could withstand him, and all who were nearest gave way before him. And then an arrow struck through his throat, and King Harald Sigurdsson fell dead.
It's amazing to me how often in these battles the great leaders of these armies fall to an arrow. That's what is said happened to Harold Godwinson at the Battle of Hastings, though we really don't know entirely for sure. But I think that's how it's portrayed in the Bayeux Tapestry.
His men did not surrender. Of them it was written, the gallant men who saw him fall would take no quarter, one and all, resolved to die with their loved king around his corpse in a corpse ring. The late arrival of reinforcements did not shift the tide of battle. Tostig was found dead with an arrow through his eye, and only a handful of ships loaded with shaken survivors would make the journey home to Norway. The English tended to their wounds and gathered the dead. It seemed King Harald Godwinson had saved England, yet 3 days after the Battle of Stamford Bridge, William, Duke of Normandy, invaded with thousands of mighty warriors.
Timing is everything.
The king hastened south with some of his army, and at the Battle of Hastings, the Normans vanquished the weary English. Harald Godwinson was killed, the last of the Anglo-Saxon kings. William would cast out the old aristocracy, massacre rebels, and put himself on the throne. Now came the days of a new line of kings, a new age in England.
And we're getting, I don't know if I think it's a TV series or is it a movie, with Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones playing William the Conqueror. Looks like it's going to be pretty good.
The power of the crown was strengthened. Warfare would change as hundreds of grand castles rarely seen before in this land were raised.
Yep.
England would grow closer to continental Europe and more close to the depredations of Scandinavia. Sweyn would twice attempt Danish invasions of England and fail. And the body of King Harald Hardrada was returned to Norway, and the throne passed to his sons. He would be remembered in song and saga as cruel and avaricious, and adventurous, wise, and valiant. The last howl of a dark, brave, and wild age. So History Dose is just two people, me, Chris, and my
So this is cool. He's actually showing how he does the painting. I think he does it all digitally.
brother Joe, the one painting this. What you just watched is literally hundreds of hours of work between us, researching, writing, editing, and manually creating historically informed art. While we rely on the whims of YouTube to bring in viewers, if you want to keep this channel alive and access History Dose content not available anywhere else, become a member of the Patreon for...
Yeah, you know what? I support a lot of channels through Patreon. I really need to sign up and support these guys because they do such fantastic work. I definitely want to support it and keep them going. Patreon, as somebody who could not have this channel without the supporters of Patreon, I 100% understand that, and I encourage you, it doesn't have to be me. Whoever your favorite content creators are, if you are in a position, even if it's just like at the lowest tiers that they offer, please do it. You have no idea what a difference it really makes. So, fantastic work. I loved that that series, or that video. I guess it was one video we made in a little series. Fantastic. I definitely need to check out more of their stuff, and I hope you do as well. Thanks for watching.